Hello, ladies. This episode is sponsored by the Fiat Institute. So if you've been listening to our show for any amount of time, you likely know that Fiat Institute is a company that I, Jamie Rachi, co-host of the Hormone Genius podcast, own. I started this organization a couple years ago, and I certify women to become hormone coaches. So it's likely that as you're listening to our episodes, you are feeling a deep conviction to serve the women in your world. But you may think to yourself, wait, I can't. I haven't gone to med school. I'm not a nurse. I don't have an advanced degree in a healthcare arena. Well, I have some good news for you, ladies, because I created this program for you. I created this program for the woman who wants to start a hormone coaching business and make a change in this world. So if you are looking to make an impact while making an income, again, be sure to visit my website, www.fiatinstitute.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Fiat Institute. I hope to be in touch with you soon and enjoy our episode.
I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh.
It's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rachi and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hello and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. I am here with Jamie Rachi, my co-host, and we are here to talk about a very specific thing. We are, excited. We did already a podcast on magnesium, marvelous magnesium. We hope you love that. And so we're going to move into another nutrient that we think is super important, and that's omega-3 fatty acids. I love this so much, and I've already talked about it, on multiple previous podcasts that we have done, but we're going to really dive in and look at why omega-3 fatty acids are essential for health and why maybe you should really think about how you can obtain more of them for your health. So Jamie, I am excited because I have been learning all about omega-3s, and I thought I knew a lot about them already. And I realized, wow, there is so much information and so much research that has already been done in the area of omega-3s. So that's pretty awesome from a nutritional standpoint.
Totally. I'm very excited to jump into this one. Teresa, per our usual, this will be a question and answer format. So Teresa, I'll be asking you all the questions about omegas and you will answer them. And I'm sure you'll wow our listeners and I'll learn so much from you. And I can't wait to get started. So let's just start off generally. When we say omegas, like what are omega fatty acids?
Yeah. So, there's different fatty acids. Number one, when we talk about omega-3s, they are an essential fatty acid. And what that means is basically our body cannot produce them. And so we have to get them from our diets. And omega-3 fatty acids are basically like long chains of carbon atoms. And one of the things I learned, which again, sometimes in these things, it seems so simple, but then you're like, oh, I didn't know that, is that omega, obviously that word means end, right? So we have alpha and omega. So an omega-3 means that there are two or more double bonds, or specifically in these particular types of poly-unsaturated fats, where they place the double carbon bond is at the third spot from the end. So when we say omega-3, that means that that's where the double carbon bond is positioned. And so for an omega-6, it would be in the sixth spot. So these are, again, long chain fatty acids that our bodies essentially need for life. And they have an incredible amount of functions in the body. They're made in every cell membrane, and they're particularly important for our brain health, but they're also incredibly important for energy, for our heart health, for our skin, for our eyes and the retina of our eyes. So they have very important functions in the body. And there are three essential, basically, groups of omega-3s, which you probably know of. One is plant sourced, and two are from marine or what we call fish sources. So the plant source omega-3 fatty acids are alpha linoleic acid. And then the other two, the marine ones, are EPA or isopentanoic acid and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. And those are two really hard words to say. So most people do not say them. They say EPA and DHA. But those are the ones that we have the most, you could say, research around in terms of the health effects. And we can dive a little bit deeper on why that's the case and, what's the difference between those particular types of omega-3s and how you get them in your diet.
Sure. Okay, so the main focus of today's episode will be we're going to really dig into these omega-3s and talk about each of these three groups a little bit more. But for our listeners who've also heard about omegas, they've heard of 3s, 6s, and 9s. So can we kind of clear the air on that? What's the difference? Well, you said already that it's, the 3, the part that's a little end. How do you say that, Teresa? You said like the 3...
The double carbon bonds.
Yes, 3, yeah, okay. And then the 6 and the 9. So tell us more about where we find those 6s, where do we find those 9s, and then let's really dive deep into the omega-3s.
Yeah, so omega-6s and omega-9s are more in what we call seed oils. So those are, for example, alpha-linoleic acid is found in flaxseed, soybean oils, and canola oils. And omega-9s are going to be more like your corn oil, I believe. And some of the other kind of like vegetable type oils. So, and actually, when I've learned a lot about this, we often kind of hear that omega-6s and omega-9s are bad, and that's not the case. Omega-6s and 9s are also incredibly essential for health and for life. And if we didn't have them, we would suffer. So it's more about kind of, you could say, the ratio that we're getting between omega-3s and omega-6s and 9s. And so that's really the focus we want to have here, is that not that, certainly most of us know, like we learned that trans fats are bad, right? And I think that message has gotten across, and trans fats are, they come from more like the old time Crisco and margarine, these very, very much saturated kind of solid fats that really do have kind of some damage to health. But some of these other oils like soybean, canola oil, corn oils, things like that in moderation certainly can be healthy. And they are in a lot of foods that we eat. So we don't usually have a problem getting omega-6s, but we do often have a problem getting omega-3s. And again, that's going to be the big thing we focus on. In fact, in America, they have found that at least 70% I think in America, it's actually 95% of Americans are deficient in omega-3. And the average consumption of omega-3 fatty acids is 100 milligrams per day. 100 milligrams per day. In ocean-based countries, the average consumption of omega-3s is around 2 to 2.5 grams of omega-3. So a huge difference. So there's an overwhelming deficiency in omega-3s. And this is going to be really important when we look at studies, because the people who make the most benefit, or where health gains are most seen, are in those people who have been so deficient in this nutrient, and then they change that to become healthy in omega-3, which can actually be measured. Those health gains, those changes in what we're seeing in terms of chronic disease prevention are pretty astronomical. And that's why for a lot of us who are in the area of health, when we talk about things that are what we might say is low-hanging fruit, and often we'll say that, what's just low-hanging fruit? What can I do on a daily basis that, would increase my ability to stay healthy and have longevity? Omega-3s is definitely one of those that I would put at the top.
Yeah. So when we consume, let's say we're consuming omega-3s, we're eating fish, weekly, and we're really focusing on maybe good supplementation and all of that. At the point in which I bring that into my body, how does that fat then convert into the fatty acid?
So it's a good question. So when you talk about conversion, so our body has a really hard time converting even like the alpha linoleic acid, that omega-3, which comes from flaxseed and walnuts, and oftentimes is the one we think of as really healthy. A lot of people add those into their diet. We actually have a really hard time converting that to, again, what has the most research in omega-3s for health benefits into EPA and DHA. So this is really important. And it's been studied in vegans and vegetarians who are very much plant-based, that those people who eat a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet are actually going to be significantly low in omega-3s, even if they eat a ton of products with alpha linoleic acid. There are some exceptions to that based on genetics, because based on our own genetics, it determines how well we convert those fatty acids to EPA and DHA. Mm-hmm. So we really literally have to obtain those EPA, DHA substances, which are just hard to do, especially, Jamie, for you and me. Yeah. I mean, we live in the middle of the Midwest. So, right. I mean, getting ocean fishes is not going to be easy. We can get grass-fed beef, which does have some omega-3s in it, but still the incredible difference in amount of omega-3s in marine fish, we just are really going to struggle to do that. And in order for us to get a healthy level of omega-3 in our blood, we literally would have to eat, fish 2 to 3 times a week. And even then, sometimes you would actually have to supplement to be able to get to the level of a blood index. And we can talk about that, Jamie, that would allow us to receive those benefits that we're talking about. Right. So, and we can go through again, what has been studied and what do we know about the benefits of omega-3?
Let's dig into that. Normally, Teresa, when I think about omegas, I do think about hormone health, because we know, again, these fatty acids, there's a lipid layer around our cells. And so we need receptor sites. And in order to grab onto those hormones, we need a good fatty layer. And I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and the quality of that layer around the cell is literally indicative, or it's literally dependent on the types of fat that you put in your mouth. I'm like, well, that's a good point. It's a really good point. So normally when I think about omegas, I think about hormones and I think about mood. But you mentioned how there's other benefits of bringing in omega-3s into our diet. So maybe let's start first off, if you don't mind, Teresa, let's talk about mood, because I think a lot of people maybe think about that initially. And if not, if you have kids or you yourself struggle with hyperactivity, depression, any of those things, omegas are a really important thing to add to our diet. But can you make sense of that, Teresa, to our listeners?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that, yes, you're right. The omega-3s have been found to help depression, to help cognitive function. But what's interesting is the brain is over 60% DHA, but the studies that they did to show that it benefited mood actually was EPA. So DHA didn't have as much effect on mood as actually EPA. Now, your body can convert kind of the two back and forth a little bit. So, but that was what kind of was a little bit interesting. But yeah, there's a study that showed that taking 1 gram of EPA daily, a full gram, so a full 1,000 milligrams of just EPA, improved depression just as much as SSRIs. Wow. So that was a big deal. And then on cognitive decline, which is, of course, really important to me for someone who has a family history of Alzheimer's. And I actually also have the AP04 gene, which increases my risk of Alzheimer's as well. Mm. But in studies where they looked at literally the level of omega-3 in patients' bloods and compared it to those who had Alzheimer's and then those who didn't. And those with the highest omega-3 levels had an incredibly reduced incidence of Alzheimer's disease. But they also found that their brains were actually larger in volume, and that the memory center of the brain, the hippocampus, was also larger in patients with the highest level of omega in their blood. So again, very, very clearly that if we are deficient in omega-3s, it has an impact on brain function. And again, the brain has always been thought about as having a lot of fat in it. And fat is an incredible, we talk about like ketones, right? And the ketogenic diet. I mean, we know fat is like a really powerful energy source for the mitochondria of the cells. And like Jamie, you said, the cell membrane is literally made up of these essential fatty acids. And it also allows for there to be better communication between all nutrients and what the enzymatic processes of the body occur on a cellular level occur importantly with better amounts of fatty acids. So basically our cells just work better. They can receive messages better. They can transport messages better with higher levels of omega-3s.
So tell us now, we just talked about omegas and our mood and brain health, which I think that's so important. And we'll talk about supplementation too, because that's the good news. Even though we live in the Midwest, there are still like many of ways we can supplement our diet with omegas. But tell us a little bit about how omegas affect hormone support and balance.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back to cholesterol, and a cholesterol is a fat that has to be carried through the body through substances we call lipoprotein. So we need these essential fatty acids to make cholesterol in the liver. And again, then, our body uses these to help make hormones. So it's just essential for life in terms of the hormonal processes. But I would really like to focus on this because it's very important to women's health, is that we know that when a woman is going to conceive a pregnancy and have a pregnancy, a developing child in her womb, that DHA and EPA are also incredibly important, which is why some of you know that in your prenatal vitamins, you will see that it'll say added DHA, because DHA is incredibly important for the brain development of children. And one of the things that's been brought up a lot is that, because of the fears around contamination with fish, particularly with mercury, that many women have been very fearful of actually eating more fish in pregnancy. And, there's a consideration that might be a very detrimental kind of fear, because in studies, what they're seeing is that the patients, again, with the highest level of omega-3 consumption, their babies end up having not only a healthier outcome, so there's an association with higher omega-3s and less premature birth, but also with brain development and IQ later in life. And even the women who had a little bit higher mercury levels, and they've tested this in their blood, the actual outcome still, it kind of trumped over it. So again, we all get exposed to a certain amount of toxins, but the omega-3s are protective to the body so much that even though there was a higher amount of mercury exposure for those who ate the highest amount of omega-3s in pregnancy, there was no negative consequences on brain or IQ or any other measure that they could find. So there's actually new research continuing to go on about these important things for women's health, and pregnancy and breastfeeding is also incredibly important. And I know that just by doing this research, I'm going to be, continuing to push women to get more omega-3s in their diet in pregnancy and in postpartum breastfeeding, because who doesn't want to give their baby's brain the best chance of having a healthy IQ and brain function in life and happiness, really. So that's something that I really learned. There's something called the Fatty Research Institute that's developed where they're doing all of this research in this area of women's health. So that's really exciting.
Awesome. Very cool. Okay. So what are some of the surprising ways that omega-3s affect our health that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah. So one of the things that is surprising, maybe, but is that it helps dry eye syndrome. I mean, I knew that, but I guess I didn't really know the strength of the research around it, because I often would recommend fish oil to my patients who have dry eye in menopause, which is a common symptom of menopause, that your eyes just get dry to a point where it's bothersome to the patient. But there's research that supports that it definitely improves the oils, you could say, coming through the glands of the eye that lubricate our eyes. Another one is rheumatoid arthritis. And when I say this, the research that they've done on rheumatoid arthritis is that omega-3s actually decrease the pain. Now we know these omega-3s in fish oil, EPA, DHA have an incredible anti-inflammatory effect. They call them protectants and resolvents. They are allowed in the body to resolve inflammation. Really important. And in resolving inflammation, they actually decrease the amount of joint pain in patients that have rheumatoid arthritis. But I've seen this extrapolated to all sorts of pain, knee pain. I've seen it in any sort of arthritic condition. So, it's funny. A lot of doctors will use something called meloxicam, which is an anti-inflammatory for, your typical kind of like knee pain or joint pains, or again, any sort of arthritic condition. And what I do is I put my patients on 2 fish oil, 2 turmeric in the morning, and 2 fish oil, 2 turmeric at bedtime. And I've had incredible success with patients using that protocol over meloxicam for just ridding patients of joint pain. So that's a surprising one. I think the one that's probably not as surprising, but that we haven't talked about, Jamie, is just its effect on heart health. Mm-hmm. And this is, so important for women and men too. Goodness. But, not all research that they have found with omega-3 fatty acids have proven that it decreases heart disease, but a lot has. And, there's so much kind of complexity around nutrition research. It's like each study uses a different dose and each study uses a different product. So it's hard to get kind of the same outcomes. And so that's where there's been some controversy around whether fish oil actually should be taken for heart health. Mm-hmm. But if you just looked at all the studies, and especially even the good randomized controlled studies, there was one called the Reduce It trial. That trial was over 8,000 patients, and it decreased. It was using EPA only in high amounts. They used, I think, like somewhere around 4 grams, I want to say, of EPA. The overall reduction, Jamie, of cardiovascular events, including strokes and heart attacks, was a reduction of 25%. So a significant reduction compared to the placebo group in the Reduce It study. And then the one other effect that's been proven over and over again with heart health is that it lowers triglycerides. Now, I often give fish oil to my patients who have high cholesterol, like the kind of typical, your cholesterol is a little high, your LDL is a little high. And I use fish oil all the time. But what I'll tell my patients is that this is not going to decrease your LDL necessarily. Now, it could in some patients, but I'm not expecting that, because that's not what I'm expecting it to do. I do believe, though, because it is anti-inflammatory, and we know this, it decreases the inflammation in the vessel walls, and it decreases blood pressure. It is shown to decrease blood pressure. And for sure, it acts like a baby aspirin. So, they've definitely done studies to show that it decreases the ability of our platelets, which our platelets are what form clots, right? And when we have a heart attack, it really is just a clumping of platelets many times that have formed that is clogging up that artery. So, to let our body run smoothly and efficiently, again, these fatty acids are really anti-inflammatory. So I have any of my patients concerned about heart health, definitely eating more fish and definitely talking them about omega-3 supplementation. So many studies have proven the effect on heart disease as a very positive outcome.
This is so interesting, Teresa. I've been taking omegas for like 10 years just because it's part of my like daily regimen, but I'm so glad I do and have. And for those of you who aren't, go run to the store and get some because it's important. It's very important. So how do we know, Teresa, when we're taking a supplement, we're talking about these 3 groupings within the omega-3s. How do we know how much of each of those 3 groupings are in the supplement bottle? And perhaps it's listed out and I've never looked.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering about that.
Yeah, let's totally talk about that, Jamie. And I brought my omega-3 bottle with me right here because I wanted to have that reference, because you're right. I didn't really pay attention to this, and this is so important. It's going to be important for you to make a decision about what's the best supplement for you to take. So here's the things that you want to look for. So you want to go to the back of your omega-3 supplement and you want to look at, of course, what they're going to give you is a total kind of milligram amount. And then my supplement here, it's an omega-3 fatty acid. It's actually a Trader Joe's brand. And it is a 1,200 milligram supplement in total. But what it tells you underneath the 1,200 milligrams is that it has 400 milligrams, again, of isopentanoic acid, the EPA, And then it has 200 milligrams of the docosahexaenoic acid, the DHA. And so that's a total of 600 milligrams of the pure omega-3s that we want. But obviously, that's another 600 milligrams that's not that. So what is the other stuff? And so you have to look at what they use in there. So they might sometimes say it's other fish oils, or this one actually has some glycerin water and some rosemary extract. So you really want to know what the amount of EPA and DH is in each capsule too, the serving size as well. Because if it says to take 4 capsules to get, 400 milligrams of EPA, well, that's a lot of capsules you're getting for a low amount of EPA. And from a cost perspective, you're trying to get the highest amounts. So what you want to look for is the highest amounts of EPA, the highest amounts of DHA with the least amount of anything else per capsule, if that makes sense. Now, some of the other things that I learned about choosing an omega-3, because there's like 1,000 brands of them, what do I do? I mean, I think you can hear a lot of things and it can be overwhelming and fearful, like, oh my gosh, mercury poisoning and contaminants and all of these things, right? It is true. Like, we have to care about like the quality of our products. And, if you really want to know where your stuff has been tested and third-party tested, there's a website called IFOS. If you just put IFOS and fish oil, it'll come up. And that's a certified organization that's a third-party tester that makes sure that fish oils are quality. So that's something. One thing I learned is that you want to make sure that the bottle that you have the fish oil in is not clear, because fish oil is prone to oxidation. So it's sensitive to heat and light, and it can turn rancid. So it should be either in a dark or amber bottle if possible, or not being able to see through. And again, in general, the amount of EPA should be greater than 500 milligrams, and the DHA greater than 300 milligrams would be ideal per serving. And you're looking to get, based on, actually, this is the National Institutes of Health recommendation, Jamie. Again, I said Americans get 100 milligrams, and we want to get a gram of EPA and DHA in combination, at least. I mean, you would argue that there would be benefits for higher, but that's just what the National Institutes of Health recommend. You also want to make sure that your fish oil is in what we call a triglyceride form. And there is another form called ethyl esters, and they're usually not used as much anymore. They are in the prescription versions of fish oil, but you want the triglyceride form because the liver and the body has a better time processing that oil and using it in the body. And then for those people who maybe don't want to use fish oil, maybe you're concerned about the environment, like we're destroying the oceans, and we are, and there's all sorts of problems with salmon and their ability to get to their homing grounds and all this stuff. Like, we are, of course, destroying our environment in so many ways. So maybe you're like, I don't want to use fish oil because, I want to continue to be thoughtful about the environment. Well, if you have a little extra money to spend, you can get algae oil. Now, what's funny is like, we don't think about it, but fish, how they get omega-3s is they eat microalgae. That's where omega-3s come from. So you can actually just get algae oil and eat it kind of straight from the source. Now, algae oil, the people that are making that, probably the brands are going to be a little bit more premium, but you don't probably have to worry about much in the way of other problems with it. So that's a kind of like the vegan source, you could say, of, using a fish oil product. And the other thing about algae oil is super cool is that they're starting to do research on actually like building farms of actual algae so that we could spare fish and using them for fish oil. And that if we make farms of algae, you can actually gather the algae oil straight from it. And that would be incredibly helpful if we had better and more, bigger sources for it. Yeah. What else you got?
Well, I was watching a documentary type show on Netflix called You Are What You Eat. Have you seen that?
No, I've heard of it, though.
Yeah, it's good. And basically, they're just comparing. So if those of you listening, and if you love watching documentaries, go and watch it. I actually have not finished it yet because I think it's multiple series. So it's a twin study. They wanted to measure based on the twins, because anytime we want to comparing twins are always the best bet because they're most genetically similar, of course, because they're twins. They had one twin eat a vegan type diet, and then the other twin eat a carnivore type diet, and they wanted to know what would happen with their health. But in this experiment, you're getting to know a lot about how, fish are farmed and cattle are fed and all these things. And so if you're not ready to learn some of the things about meat that I wasn't ready to learn necessarily when I was watching it, then, maybe set a timer for a year from now to watch it. But it's interesting. They talked a lot about salmon, and even the quality of salmon. That the quality of salmon is good when it's this bright red color. If it's not farmed, but they can also add the red dye to make it look nice and fresh. And so it's this whole thing. And I never thought nearly as much about salmon or fish or meat as I have after watching that. So it was so good.
I've heard a lot of opinions about the farm versus wild caught. And obviously, if we had a choice, we would do wild caught. But the thing about it is, I mean, we have very little access to that, and especially here where I'm at. And it's better to actually eat salmon than not. And so that's, I think, the take home message is, even if it's frozen, obviously fresh is better, but you just had to do the best that you can to get omega-3s. And so you don't always have to be so freakishly worried about those things, which I think we can get in our heads.
But I love what you're saying though about the algae farm. That's what made me think of that. I thought that would be such an interesting way to get that. And I never thought about that either, how fish are feeding on the algae. And that's an incredible source of omegas. So I just thought that was really cool.
One more thing, Jamie, and I know we're coming to the end here, but I do want to mention that there is a blood test for omega-3. And so I think that if anybody's interested in knowing what their omega-3 level is, this would be really important. Like, know where you start. Here's the deal. Most Americans, the average omega, and this is in the red blood cell, it's called the Omega Quant test. You can get it for $50, and if you want the index that goes with it, I think it's $100. The Omega Quant. We can put the link in the show notes to it. Yeah. The average American is around 4%. If you can get your level to 8% or above, your chance of living 3 to 5 years longer goes up. Like, that's what they have studied. Like, that difference between 4 to 8% does increase your longevity. I happened to get my Omega Quant done incidentally, and mine was 5.5%. So it wasn't terrible, but I still have a lot to go. And there's a lot of variation between these levels. But if you really want to know where you're at and what you should be doing and how hard you want to push this, maybe consider getting your level done. And then, I just think if people are like, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what brand of fish oil to get, there are some brands that I trust. And when I say this, I'm only saying it because I know my patients are like, can you just please tell me a few that you would trust, right? I don't have any affiliation with any of these brands, nor get anything out of saying these brands. But the ones that I would recommend would be Nordic Naturals and Carlson's and Nordic Naturals. Those are a little bit more premium in terms of price. If you want what I trust in terms of what I think is a little bit more cost effective, the brands Now, NOW, and Jarrow are both really good brands for the omegas as well. So those are just a few brands. I did say I take a Trader Joe's one because it's also super cost effective. So I sometimes recommend that one too. That has a little lower amounts of EPA and DHA. So I might switch that up. And people worry about the fish burps. I often don't think that that's a big deal, but if it does bother you, take it at bedtime. Some people think that freezing it helps because it slows down the digestion a little bit, that if you do get fish burps, you can try freezing it. So that could be something that would help you. And I think that's all I got, Jamie. I'm sorry. I know that I talk so much, and I apologize because I totally but I had learned so much about omega-3s. I'm like, I have to get this right. And we didn't even talk about the fact that, salmon isn't the only, it's oily fish. Hey, here's a great acronym we can end on. Okay. SMASH. I learned this from Dr. Mark Hyman. Okay. SMASH. SMASH. People that are really good to listen to. Rhonda Patrick on omega-3s is super smart, guys. Rhonda Patrick, if you just want to learn more. But Dr. Mark Hyman has this acronym for the fish that are oily that have the most omega-3s, and it's called SMASH. So it's salmon, mackerel, anchovies, shrimp, and herring. Smash.
Smash. That's so cool. How easy is that?
Super
That's perfect.
easy.
Smash. Not something I'm going to forget. One thing I do want to say, though, before we leave, Teresa, first off, you are so smart. And so I learned so much from you. So I just get to sit and relax. I just get to watch you do your thing, which I love. But I do want to also say this one other thing. I went to a health conference years ago, and they were talking about omegas. And something I never thought about ever in my life was that it's helpful to consider the ratio in which you consume your omegas, and how that's actually going to this health conference is what got me taking omegas more just regularly, because I didn't want an overabundance of omega-6s. So like you said at the very beginning of the episode, omega-6s are found in a lot of like vegetable oils and processed foods even. Like we get a lot of omega-6s, and while omega-6s are good, we need omega-6s. They're essential nutrients, which means we don't make them. We get a lot of them, and the average American gets too much. And what happens is if we get too much omega-6s and not enough omega-3s, there's inflammatory responses. So autoimmune diseases and cancers and chronic conditions and all these things. So that's why I started getting more hyper, because I wanted to even out that ratio, more of like a 1-to-1, or they even say like a 1-to-4, like something that's better than 1-to-15, which is the average American. I'm going to cite the source here. It is from The Importance of Omega-6, Omega-3 Fatty Acid. In Sage Journals, Experimental Biology and Medicine is what that is, the journal. But anyway, they talk about that ratio. So the American average is 1-to-15, which is way too high.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So the easiest thing to focus on, not so much like obviously get processed foods out of your diet, but get more omega-3s.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to help your ratio. Don't focus on the omega-6s. Get more omega-3s.
Get more omega-3s.
Eat more fish and consider taking a supplement. Thank you for letting me do this episode with you. As always, I will see you again.
All right. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.